Good morning, everyone. Today's another episode of Arks Trash Evolution. For those who don't know, this is my podcast, which is audio only. However, I have prepared some B-roll for those visual listeners out there. Now, today's special guest is ZNRenova, which is a very good Luster player back in the base game, so I had to get him onto the podcast to pick his brain to see what his opinion is on the Slayer, because the Slayer is now available in NGS. But before we jump into all of that, if you're new to the channel, I upload NGS content daily, so if you do play this game, I would really appreciate a subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin the video. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Arks Trash Evolution. Today we have special guest Renova. Renova, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Renova. I make content of PS2 on my YouTube, and I also stream on Twitch.
Perfect. So, Renova, the big Slayer drop has finally come in. We've had less than 24 hours. We've had like 20 hours to mess around with the class, including the whole leveling process. So, a lot of our takes obviously are going to be very hot takes or fresh takes because we've only had 20 hours to try the class. But what's your initial impressions of the Slayer?
My first impressions is I love the counter system that Slayer has, the fast combat that the class has as well, and overall it's just every time I'm like playing the class, I just like it. I'm like enjoying it the more I play it.
I personally think the Slayer class is a great addition to the game because you've got the more slower methodical gameplay with the Braver, you know, as long as you can count to 3, you do weapon actions, you do empowered attacks, all of that. It's very methodical, it's a lot more slower paced. Versus the Slayer class, it's very fast-paced compared to the Braver, for example. Even though there are similarities of like weapon actioning, your counters and side steps and stuff like that, but the Slayer just feels a lot more mobile and a lot more smooth, flowing between Photon Arts and normal attacks and dodging and weaving, which is really, really nice. Could you tell me more about the actual rotations or the actual skills that you personally really enjoy about the Slayer?
So the skills is a lot to take in. I know I made a video about the whole Slayer guide. The two main skills I love using are obviously the two active skills, especially the dome one, which is called the Gunblade Focus Overdrive. The system between the two actives is that one skill is benefiting from the other, so that way you can use the actives more often, you know what I mean? And that's what I like about the skills.
Yeah, for sure. The Slayer gameplay is very unique in the sense that you've got your little bar at the top that, well, I mean, I'm just going to call it the overdrive bar because the skill is literally called overdrive. You fill up that bar, you go into overdrive, and then you've got this other skill that's like a pseudo gap closer that gives you 5% crit chance. So you do that, and then your overdrive is giving you a ton of PP reduction, a ton of potency, and a ton of crit rate, and you're just going ham on the boss, and it's really cool. But I want to touch on Relentless Blade, because Relentless Blade is a mechanic that you get in your skill tree, but it doesn't really tell you what it does in-game. Like, you know, there's no tutorial in NGS. It just kind of throws you in there, and you're just kind of experimenting and messing around with rotations. So what's your take on Relentless Blade?
Relentless Blade to me is a hit and miss. To me, it's like one of those skills where you play casually and then you just press buttons and then you see some random sparks and you activate the skill that you didn't know you had. I think that's where the Relentless Blade is coming from, because I think there is a visual, that way you know the Relentless Blade triggered. Because if I remember correctly, you have to do like a normal attack in the middle of like PAs or something like that to bring out more damage and supposedly bring out the best of the Slayer.
Yeah. We were messing around yesterday about this because I wanted to see what the visual looked like. So the moment you cast your Photon Art, you're spamming your normal attack. So it's immediate. You don't even need to see your Photon Art come out yet, and you're just spamming left click or the normal attack. And that's how you pull it off. You'll see that little eye icon. It'll just like show up. It'll flash for a second and then it'll disappear. Do you know the when you do like a charged attack, charged normal attack into weapon action, and you can immediately like gap close? It looks very similar to that flash. However, the flash for that is on your character. It's a very interesting concept. It's a very nice min-maxy type of thing, but it definitely is going to take some time for people to get used to it and to integrate it into their actual combinations without just spamming. I feel like I'm spamming a lot of normal attacks in between the Photon Arts, just hoping that I do Relentless Blade. How does it feel to you?
In general, the gameplay is very fast-paced with Slayer, and then when you're just doing like regular combat as a Slayer, Slayer is very fast. You can hardly see the window, like the opportunity to just like press a normal attack because the PAs come out so fast. Depending on which PAs, there's some slow ones, there's some fast ones, just like Spica, and then there's like a very small window that you can just spam the normal attack and to try to proc the Relentless Blade.
Spica is definitely one of the harder ones to pull off because the animation for Spica is so short, right? The Photon Art that I like to take advantage the most of in order to pull off Relentless Blade is actually Flowing Cyrus or Flowing Sirius. I don't know how you pronounce it. I'm going to call it Cyrus from now on just to trigger everyone. But, you do the second charge of that because the second charge of that is very, very noticeable when you're stationary. You slash horizontally twice and then you do an overhead slash downward. And that's when you know, oh, I've casted the second charge of that. The moment you see that vertical slash down, then you hit left click or just normal attack. That's my visual cue to know how to pull off Relentless Blade. And it pulls it off every single time. The only downside to this is it takes freaking forever to pull out the Relentless Blade because the Photon Art is so long to deal that 1000 plus potency. It's like a 3-hit into another 3-hit combo. So it takes forever to pull it off, but it's very consistent because you have plenty of time and that window is very generous to do a Relentless Blade. And it does a metric butt ton of damage. Like, whenever I do that, Relentless Blade's hitting for like 5,000 to 8,000 damage. And it's just like, bam, one big ass shot. It's super cool, super nice and satisfying. The only problem is you're stuck stationary while you're doing it. Even though you can animation cancel out of it, for me personally, my muscle memory hasn't adapted to it yet. It just doesn't feel right. When I'm doing a big, hard-hitting attack, I just want to be stationary. And so I keep getting, punished for that, obviously. But what about you? Is there like a specific Photon Art that you really resonate with when doing boss fights and stuff or 1v1 content?
For me, the PA combo that I started to resort to would be like the Spica, the gap closing of that version, right? And then the move arts of the Waving Regale, right? So I would start with the Spica to like gap close the enemy and then immediately go to the Waving Regale to at least put in like some AoE if there's like enemies around me. And then within that window, I would try to like spam normal attack because the window is pretty big to proc that Relentless Blade, and it's been working well for me so far.
I actually realized we're like 10 minutes into the podcast and we keep talking about Relentless Blade, but we never explained what the hell it is. So could you explain to the audience what is Relentless Blade?
So the Relentless Blade is one of the skills that you can press the normal attack in the middle of when you're performing a PA. It doesn't matter what PA it is. It can be any PA, either through the move arts or stay arts, any PA, and then you just press the normal attack button, and then the Relentless Blade will trigger.
So for the audience that's watching, I highly recommend just spamming your Photon Art, doing like without inputting anything, and then try it while spamming your normal attack. So the moment you click your Photon Art, just start spamming your normal attack and just compare the difference. You're going to be able to see that Relentless Blade does a special animation, and that is the extra damage that you're pumping out. And it actually pays off quite a bit because it deals a significant amount of damage depending on what Photon Art you're doing. And of course, because we have so much critical rate from all of our buffs and our actives, whenever you hit those crits, they become nice, big, juicy numbers. While we're talking about all of this, Renova, we need to talk about the overdrive gauge. How do you feel about that system? Or could you explain to the audience what that system is first?
Okay, there's quite an explanation in here. Think of the overdrive just like Lester's voltage system in base PSO2, where you have to like consistently attack to keep up the gauge. But if you're like not attacking, it will slowly like deplete. The same system works in both PSO2 and NGS, and you can obviously get benefits from the focus overdrive too. Of course, you can get like massive PP regen if like the focus age depletes, and bonus crit rate, which is one of Slayer's main things is to boost crit rate.
So just to add on to that, the Slayer, the TLDR of the Slayer, or like what the core concept of this class is essentially you want to be on the offense all the time. You want to be hitting things, you want to be in the thick of things, weaving in and out, dodging attacks, countering, just dealing tons of damage all the time. The reason for this is because of your overdrive gauge. Whenever you hit an enemy, you gain a little bit of this gauge. So as these bars fill up, you get more and more buffs. You get PP reduction, you get more critical rate, you get more potency, and then once it's filled all the way to maximum of 5 bars, you activate overdrive. And once you're activated in overdrive, that bar no longer depletes and you just get massive amounts of buffs. So a ton of potency, a ton of critical rate, and PP reduction again, and you can just go to town on the boss. And when it's almost up, because it lasts for 30 seconds, once you're at like 29 seconds, you can push it again to do a finisher attack in order to deal tons of damage. For those who watched my Slayer video earlier, like a couple days ago, you saw that I would do this one big hitting attack that hits for like 12,000, 18,000 damage, and that's because of the ending of Overdrive. It hits a lot, for a lot, and because you have so much critical rate, the chances of you hitting it a crit is extremely high. And that is how the Slayer plays in a nutshell. But Renova, what are the more nuanced things that I probably have missed out on this? How do you actually fill up the gauge more efficiently? Do you know yet?
From what I came up with, charging the normal attacks from your Gunblade apparently fills up 1 bar each time.
That is correct. When you do the full charge, so that is the second charge with the normal attack, you'll shoot like a giant projectile. But if that hits, it fills up 1 entire bar and a little bit more of the second bar. When Bujin does his dome, instead of standing in the dome and just, spamming the weapon action to deal extra damage, I like to use that as an opportunity to step back, fully charge in order to fill up that gauge. And then right after you finish a fully charged shot, if you wait a second and then you weapon action, you actually do like an instantaneous gap closer and you fly into the boss or whatever you're targeting on. And it's very flexible, and it's very nice that the Slayer kind of caters to all these different playstyles. Like obviously, we're only 20 hours in, so we haven't found the optimal playstyle yet. But for me personally, I'm trying to find a middle ground between Braver and Slayer, because I'm very comfortable with Braver. I'm a big fan of the Braver gameplay. But if you compare Slayer with Braver, Slayer is so much faster. The gameplay is like 3, 4, 5 times faster than the Braver. The thing is, I'm trying to find a middle ground because my old man brain can't comprehend and can't keep up with the APM requirement at the moment without just messing up everything. What about you, Renova? Are you able to keep up with the APM requirement? Do you feel like this class is very APM intensive?
I don't know about APM. I just compare it to Base Luster because Base Luster is very fast as well. And for NGS with Braver, it comes down to muscle memory for me now. So it's very hard for me to like adapt to Slayer's playstyle because I'm so used to Braver. Katana, because I'm always like really patient waiting for attacks to come at me, where Slayer I have to do the opposite and be aggressive towards the enemies. I'm not used to that.
Something that I found really eye-opening or really weird when I started playing Slayer was, instead of waiting for attacks to come to me as a Braver, I was like, oh, he's gonna attack this guy. I'm gonna dash into his attack in order to get the sidestep, in order to proc the counter, to proc the whatever. So instead of like waiting for attacks to come to me, I'm the one initiating and jumping into danger in order to pull off my counters, in order to pull off my sidesteps. Actually, speaking about counters and sidesteps, do you prefer to do sidesteps or do you prefer to just do stationary weapon actions?
Personally, I'd rather do sidesteps myself because it's more satisfying to me than just stationary counters. For me, just pressing like the weapon action for countering in general just doesn't sit right for me. I'm looking for like more challenge to like peak up my gameplay, I guess.
I'm kind of the opposite. I enjoy standing still and just making sure that I get the perfect counter every single time because I find satisfaction in that. But the thing about the Slayer is your window for doing the counter is so much smaller and so much tighter compared to the Braver. The Braver is extremely lenient in your weapon action. You can just kind of like, oh, if you miss the weapon action, you can just block and you're perfectly fine. You're gonna be safe. But with the Slayer, it's like, if you miss your weapon action, you miss that block or you miss that sidestep, you take the damage, you take the full brunt of that hit. I spent 30 minutes on Bujin. I was just getting bodied because if I made any mistakes, it's just like, yep, you're dead. Try again. And it was just like rinse and repeat over and over and over until you get the muscle memory, you get the practice, you just know when to cast Photon Arts as well as weapon actions. And so in the end, I just started sidestepping. You know, when you tap weapon action, you can do a stationary one or you can do a directional one. And if you do a directional weapon action, it's literally a sidestep. And right after the sidestep, then you have an opportunity to deal additional damage. But the thing about the sidestep is the iframe on that feels longer. I don't know if it's actually longer, but it definitely feels longer than the stationary one.
Yeah, I think the one you were talking about, the whole iframe, I think it lasts through like the entire animation when you just step counter, not the weapon action one. That one is like you're more vulnerable. And another thing that I noticed lately is I think Slayer is very squishy. I don't know, that could just be me, but when I was running DFA, I've been taking more damage than I would have had when I was playing Braver before. And I was using the same equipment too with both classes. I'm like, wait a minute, something feels off. I shouldn't be dying this much.
I definitely agree. I think I know the culprit, but I need to confirm, and that is because the Slayer class is a range class. What the game doesn't tell you is if you play a melee class, you automatically have an inbuilt damage reduction. I believe it was 10% damage reduction if you play any melee class, versus if you play a range class or a technique class, you don't get that. I forgot where they wrote that, but I remember reading it somewhere, and that might be why we feel so squishy, because I 100% agree with you. Whenever I play Slayer, it sucks, because I used to be able to live these attacks through these attacks. I could face tank this with my Braver. I'm just like, wait, why can't I face tank this anymore? Like, I'm wearing the exact same gear, exact same augments, everything exactly the same, yet on my Slayer, I just get bodied. And I feel like it's probably because Slayer is no longer considered a melee class, and it's now in the range category, which means they don't get that extra damage reduction.
I never knew anything about that sort of stuff. That's kind of new to me, actually. I thought everything would be the same for like defense and HP and everything, but I guess not.
The next thing I want to talk about is, of course, comparisons of the Slayer with the Luster, because you and I have both played the base game. Now, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Luster in the base game because it was too complicated for me, but I know you played quite a bit, so tell me, what are the comparisons? Like, what are the main differences between the two classes? What do you like, what you don't like, stuff like that?
The main ones that I like between the two are, of course, the voltage and the focus gauge in between NGS and PSO2 for Luster. The skill gap is basically the same. They're both pretty high. How do I word this? Performing the stay and move arts on Luster it feels easier than the one in NGS, but that could just be me. But I've been playing base Luster for quite a while, trying to farm my S7, which I haven't yet, but I'm trying. And when I try playing Slayer in NGS, it doesn't feel the same.
So what do you mean by that? What feels off?
Pressing normal attacks in between PAs, right, to bring out more attacks. For Luster, there's a bigger window than there is in NGS, because the PAs in NGS for Slayer, you basically have to button mash just to get that Relentless Blade off, or with the slug shot or whatever that skill was called, because that basically uses your normal attack too after your PAs. And Luster doesn't have that.
That's exactly why I was saying that it feels like it's very high APM or actions per minute, is because you're constantly spamming your normal attacks while you're casting your Photon Arts and when you're ending your Photon Arts. And while you're doing that, you're also spamming your weapon action in order to pull off a counter and sidestepping. So that's why I feel like the Slayer just is a very high APM class, because you're constantly spamming all of these buttons in order to do the optimal, well, not the optimal, but in order to pump out as much damage as possible. And to me, that feels really, it's a little bit too intense if I were to play this for a long period of time. It feels like, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour. I think that would be my limit. After an hour of playing Slayer, like in high intensive situations, like Geolab's rank 2 with all modifiers turned on, like I would be really, like my fingers would be really tired from that, or I would be a little bit stressed out and be like, yeah, maybe I should go back to Braver.
Stressed out that you get smoke popping out of your ears.
Yeah, dude, because I don't feel like the Slayer class at the moment, through my first impressions, it's not the most complicated class, because we've only got 8 Photon Arts, well, technically 4 Photon Arts, and then like 8 total variants, right? So the complexity isn't gonna be like god tier complexity compared to the base game Luster. Luster has like 3 different styles, and you can interchange between the styles, and it's it's a lot more complex, and you've got a lot more Photon Arts to work with. Versus NGS with the Slayer, things are a lot more simple. At least that's how I feel. But I feel like Sega wanted to make the class feel at that little bit of artificial complexity, I guess, and they're like, oh yeah, we'll add in the normal attacks in between every Photon Art so that people feel like they're doing a lot of stuff. But I don't know if it's actually paying off. How do you feel? Like, does that make it feel more Luster or not?
I feel like it's double the work than it usually is in base, but that could just be me. But I have yet to like give a solid answer because I'm still experimenting with Slayer. I feel like the Slayer PAs are more of a reference to the base Gunblade, not much of Luster.
Flowing Cyrus kind of looks like the Luster time finisher, don't you think?
Kinda, not really. I remember I made comparisons, but now I kind of forgot what I compared to. But I know it's mostly with the original Gunblade, not Luster Gunblade. I know there's like one PA that's like a big reference to the Luster, and that one I can confirm. But the rest, I think it's just base Gunblade for PAs.
What else do you feel is different?
Not being able to stay in the air is most likely one of the cases too, because Slayer has that one PA where you jump from the floor and you can like rise up while doing attacks, and you can slam on the floor. Luster has the same mechanic, but it's not the same. It's like built into the class itself. It's not really a PA for Luster's sake. But for Slayer, it's a PA, so that changes everything.
In what way?
The way how the stuff would work, because in base, when you do that kind of mechanic, you would get like buffs to either like buff your damage or like get a passive healing whenever you deal damage. It's like lifesteal. They took that mechanic away in Slayer's PA. It's just they changed it to just do regular AoE damage.
I feel like that is definitely something I would like to see reintroduced back into the game, but I don't know, because I'm hesitant on this because I feel like it might break some mechanics. If we brought back lifesteal, I feel like the Slayer class would be number 1, like just straight up number 1 class to play because of the damage and how quick you hit. And you're just gonna heal yourself up to full like instantaneously because of your crazy combos and like of how many times you hit an enemy. But what's your take? Do you think lifesteal should be brought back to NGS or not?
I'm 50-50 on that, only because I don't think NGS needs the lifesteal because of its current state, and that would probably defeat the purpose of those rest designs just sitting around in the open field.
But I mean, you need to keep in mind that in the base game, even if you did have lifesteal, there was a limit to it, wasn't it? Like it only healed up to like 20 HP per hit or something?
I think it was like 20 or maybe 30. I remember it being a bit higher than 20.
There was a cap to it, so it wasn't like a percentage based off your total damage. It was like it would heal you a set amount maximum whenever you hit, and thus it really favored fast hitting classes. The faster you attack, the more hits you got in, the faster you healed HP, versus like if you played like a hunter where you did very slow but heavy hitting attacks, it wouldn't heal you as much because each hit only healed 30 HP or so, right?
Around there, yeah.
I don't know, I'm also on the fence regarding lifesteal. What do you feel about the Gunblade itself, the weapon itself?
It's cool. Being able to switch between the guns and the blades is a cool mechanic. But the real reason that I like the Gunblade is it's Slayer, and they brought up with my colors too. I don't know. I'm still like shook because when they first announced Slayer with the Gunblades are cool. I was just like, wait a minute. Slayer looks like my colors, right? Because my color scheme is green and black. And then when I first saw that trailer, I'm like, wait a minute, is Sega watching me or something? Because the class is green and black. I'm like, what do I do? What do I say? Should I reach out to them?
Yeah, maybe it's Sega's nod towards you, you know, a little cameo, a little acknowledgement, being like, yeah, man. Oh my goodness. But, you know, again, I wanted to talk about the Gunblade itself, though. The Gunblade, to me, personally, feels okay, but what I'm a little bit bothered about is your regular left click, right? Or your normal attack. It shoots instead of slashes. If you want to do like your melee attacks, you have to spam weapon action, right? The weapon action has like a triple hit with your melee attacks. On top of that, while you're doing your triple hit melee attacks, because you're spamming weapon action, you can also counter while you're attacking. Do you think that's overpowered or not?
Yes, because there's like a window of iframes that you can get when you're attacking with the blade itself, and I think that's pretty broken because you could just counter anytime if they like attack you in like any direction.
Because I was reading in the comment section of a couple of my newer Slayer videos, and people were just talking about how busted it is, but Sega just implemented, and they're like, yeah, it's fine. Again, we've only had 20 hours to mess around with it, so we don't know if it actually is like game-breakingly busted, or if it's just like, oh, this is strong. It's like really, really strong, but it's, you know, it's balanced, like the Braver, cough, cough. I feel like the Slayer is a fun class, but it's gonna take a lot of experimentation and a lot of trial and error and a lot of data collecting to iron out its rotation. Because to me personally, I feel like the Slayer class, there is no quote-unquote set rotation or optimal rotation. The way that I see it is everything is situational depending on what's happening on your screen. Like, are you fighting, for example, Bujin? If you're fighting Bujin, your optimal rotation is going to be different than if you're fighting like Next Alio. It really depends on what you're fighting, and you adapt your kit to that in order to pump out the most damage.
Yeah, see, I agree with you there. Every time I get asked to share what my PA rotation would be, varies, right? Like you said, it depends on what boss you fight. For example, if I'm fighting like Bujin, or any small enemies like AMs or like Hokundo, it's very easy to adapt because their attacks are easy to read, right? Compared to like, I don't know, Daldoris and Stia, which is cancerous. I hate fighting that dude. You would have to change your fighting style and try to adapt to whatever's available to you without trying to get yourself killed, because Slayer is squishy.
Something that, you know, again, as a Braver main, I have like a cookie cutter rotation set, a very cookie cutter build, where it's like, okay, you know, you're gonna get these augments, you're gonna slap them onto these armors, you're gonna use this weapon, and your rotation is gonna be count 1, 2, 3 normal attack, 1, 2, 3 normal attack. If they're trying to hit you, you counter. If you miss your counter, you hold down your weapon action and you block, right? It's very cookie cutter, very simple. But with this Slayer, it doesn't work like that. I can't be like, you're just going to use this armor, you're going to use these augments, and you're just going to go in and you're going to use this exact rotation against these bosses. Because it's so situational. If you want to pump out the most damage, you have to constantly be sliding in those Relentless Blades. And when you're getting in the Relentless Blade, you know, you need to be able to sidestep to do your next big move. It's so fast. I guess that's the only thing that I can conclude with, is the class is so fast compared to any of the other classes in NGS.
I want to add to that, because I don't know if you noticed it, but when you did the PAs, did you notice that some PAs were like animation locked?
Flowing Cyrus, when I go onto the second charge of the stationary form, after I do the overhead slash down, if I want to do Relentless Blade, I feel like I'm stuck there.
So far, the one you mentioned, I forget the name already, it's heavily animation locked. The rest of the other PAs seem fine to me. I can like move around just fine, escape any situation if I'm getting attacked or anything like that. I could just move around just fine. It's just that one PA where that animation lock turns everything around. Is if it's like you're in the middle of that PA and then you're casting another, like the second half of that, and then you're eating damage on the side, which could get you killed.
That's actually another thing I wanted to point out is When you're doing Flowing Cyrus, which is the PA that animation locks you, it gives you super armor if you have a directional key input while casting it. And so a lot of the time you don't even notice that you're taking damage because you're super armored. And so when I'm fighting Bujin, for example, I use it as a mobility. I don't like to use Spica that much. The reason because Spica's too fast for me. It's really short animation, and I find it very difficult to slide in the Relentless Blades in between each one. And so I'm just like, screw it, I'm just gonna use Flowing Cyrus because it's a longer animation. It's very easy to see that I'm doing the Relentless Blades and I can see big damage. But when you're moving around with that attack, you don't notice your HP going down. There are so many fights that I'm just fighting, and suddenly I look at my HP and I'm on yellow HP already. I'm just like, when did that happen? Because in my eyes, I look like I played perfectly because I didn't get knocked down. It didn't look like I took any hits, but it's because of the super armor. And yeah, I fully agree. Like, the class is squishy. It's so squishy.
Very squishy. And then the Flowing Serious PA, the second half that eats more of your PP as well. So like, you're at a disadvantage here. If you get hit and then you cast that, you're losing more than you can gain. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Something that bothers me actually is if you use the directional key on Flowing Sirius or Flowing Cyrus, is you can't flow from a moving PA into the stationary second charge. It doesn't work like that. To get the second charge, you have to be stationary, cast the first charge, and then stationary again to cast the second charge. So you're literally stuck in place in order to get that damage. So obviously, through the simple assessment, the way that I'm playing is clearly wrong. I should obviously be using Spica instead, which has a shorter animation, does an animation lock you, and allows you to play very freely. But Flowing Cyrus seems to be something that when you elemental down a boss, when you physical down a boss, or when the boss is like broken, then you spam the crap out of that in order to deal tons of damage. Because of its massive damage, you know, huge potential, as well as its huge PP cost. So it's not something you could just spam for days. Actually, something I wanted to ask you was, how much photon power do you have?
I think I'm sitting at like around 146 PP photon power from my current build. I'm gonna have to double check, but I know I'm in that range.
Okay. So I'm sitting on 195 photon power.
What the heck?
Yeah. And that's why I can play so recklessly. Because I've got so much room to play with. And, you know, each cast of Flowing Cyrus only takes 25 PP. Okay, I say only, but it's a lot of photon power. But because I have so much photon power, I can play like an absolute monkey. I can just spin around the boss full 360 degrees, just spamming that ability, and I'll still be at half PP.
Where are you getting all this PP from? Like,
I have Dreadkeeper 4s. I have 4 Dreadkeeper 4s.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes more sense.
Yeah. So the reason why I went Dreadkeeper 4 was because you're so squishy. And I was getting really frustrated of getting one shot. I was like, listen, I have good gear. Why am I getting one shot? Like, I have damage reduction. I don't have any negative stats. And I was still dying. And I was just like, this is BS. So I got frustrated and I was like, you know what? Dreadkeeper 4s are like 20,000 on the market. I'm just going to buy a bunch of them and just augment. So I threw Dreadkeeper 4s onto my weapon, onto all 3 armors, and I have like 900 HP and 195 photon power. I can play as carelessly and as recklessly as I want, which is amazing, and it feels really good on the Slayer class, but I know for a fact that I'm not hitting as hard as I was before, because my potency dropped from 90% down to 69%, but my potency floor increased from 62% to 75%. But the thing is, if you're playing Slayer, you crit so often if you can maintain all of your buffs, right? But when you have Charge Blade active, that gives you that 5% crit rate, and then you have your Overdrive activated, and then you've got like all of your other buffs and all of your other actives, like you gain a lot of crit rate. And so a lot of people will have the counter argument of like, do you really need that much potency floor if you can play perfectly and maintain all of those buffs? And, you know, it's questionable. Maybe you don't need all of that floor potency. because when I'm hitting enemies now, you can clearly see a huge difference because of the lack of potency that I have. I'm gonna be hitting like, about 900 damage per hit versus before where I would be hitting like 1,200, 1,300 because I have less potency. But the thing is, because I'm not afraid of making any mistakes now, because I know I can live through like 3 or 4 hits because of all the Dread Keepers, I can deal a lot more damage because of how recklessly I'm playing. So, I mean, a lot of people could have the counter argument that this is just developing bad habits, but at the end of the day, I'm just having fun with the Slayer, and I'm just derping around and messing around. And when everything hits the fan, I'm just gonna switch back to Braver, especially with next week, right? With next week, with the new Duel Quest coming out, I'm definitely switching back to Braver to play that. I don't think I would survive playing as Slayer. I think you need to have the muscle memory nailed down, as well as understand your rotation and what all of your Photon Arts do properly before you can attempt the Duel Quest and like actually pass it. What about you? Are you going to jump in with Slayer immediately when that content comes out?
My plan for the Duel Quest would be I'll try it as Slayer at first, and if I'm like struggling with the bosses there, I'll switch back to Braver just for those fights.
What do you think is the strongest class through just raw DPS? What class pumps out the most damage? Is it Slayer or is it someone else?
It's hard for me to choose from either Fighter's Double Saber, which can do a lot of DPS on its own, and Slayer. But Slayer can do a lot of DPS on its own too, so it's like there's a war between the two, and I can't really compare the two because they're both so good.
Well, I mean, you can put both of them on S tier, right? Both are good.
I guess, but for the Slayer mains out there, I'll put the Slayer ones at the top, and the Double Sabers a little bit at the bottom. Just
fair enough. Okay, I see. So for the Slayer specifically, where do you think a lot of their DPS is coming from? Is it because their attack speed is so quick, or do you actually think that they have some hard-hitting attacks?
Personally, I think it's coming from those counterattacks that they have in their kit. They can do like multiple versions of counterattacks depending on the input that you do, or like what type of counter you're gonna get, like sidestep counters or like the weapon actions. I feel like most of the damage is coming from those instead of like the PAs itself.
Yep, I actually agree with you. We were cracking this joke before we started recording the podcast, but what me and Renova think is you can play the Slayer class without any Photon Arts and you will do fine. All you need to do is know the boss rotation and just spam sidesteps or weapon action or just like straight up counters and just follow up damage through that with like your normal attack or with weapon action again. It's kind of disgusting on how hard you hit with your counters as well as your weapon actions.
The damage is actually kind of crazy.
I just find it so funny, right? We spent the past, like when we were leveling up, I was like, oh man, what's our rotation here? What are these Photon Arts? What's gonna be my single target and my AoE? Because the way that I look at every single class is exactly the same way as how I break down the Braver. The Braver is super simple. You've got your Lotus Lightning. That's for single target when the enemy is down and it's a stationary target. Huge damage, but there are some consequences to it. You can't move and you can get knocked out of it. You don't have super armor, blah, blah, blah. Then we have Iris Gale, which is your big AoE attack, which you're going to be spamming in PSE zones. It's like, okay, there's a lot of enemies around you. You just spam that. Then you have your Silver Leaf Storm, which is like, okay, the boss is moving around. This is the one that you're going to be using on single target mobile bosses or mobile strong units, whatever. And it's very simple, for the Braver. And so for every other class that I look at, I try to look for those clues, or that like, oh, this is the AoE one, this is the single target one, this is like the mobility one or whatever. And so when I looked at the Slayer, I was like, okay, we've got Flowing Cyrus or Flowing Sirius. This is the AoE one with the movement ability. But it's also the hard-hitting one because when you use the Stay Art. Then we've got Spica, which is the single target, which moves around a lot. And then you've got the move art version of Spica, which is the gap closer. So it's like, all right, so those kind of double dip. So these two Photon Arts kind of cover the majority of what you need to do. But the thing is, these two Photon Arts, even though they deal damage, they're not the bulk of your damage. The bulk of your damage is going to be through your Relentless Blade as well as your just weapon actions, which is crazy to me. Because with the Braver, you know, the Photon Arts are the ones doing the big damages, as well as your counters, of course. But with the Slayer, it's all about that Relentless Blade. That Relentless Blade hits so freaking hard when you pull those off.
Yeah, especially since Relentless Blade has that special skill where you gain like 500% potency bonus or something like that, which makes the damage even crazier.
Do you feel like this is NGS way of bringing back perfect attacks with Slayer?
Yeah, and most of the attacks that you need to like find a window to press that normal attack in there, so that does make a lot more sense now that you mention it.
Do you think perfect attacks are gonna come back in this manner, I guess, of like, hey, you can get more DPS if you do it this way?
I don't think it's gonna come back. I think it just might just be like a Slayer thing, because timing is like the only thing that Slayer has.
Actually, people who are still listening to the podcast, please sound off in the comment section below. Do you like this implementation of this quote-unquote pseudo-perfect attack or not? Because I know a lot of people, when NGS came out, when there wasn't perfect attacks, they were like, oh, thank God there's no perfect attacks. But there was also another camp of people that are like, oh my God, you ruined the game, there's no perfect attack. The game's brain dead now. So I want to hear your thoughts as well in the comments.
Yeah, I never understood the logic of that. It's just perfect attacks.
I feel like it's because of the accessibility, right? They wanted to make the game a lot more casual friendly, especially with the whole introduction of NGS, right? And perfect attacks it wasn't difficult to do. It was more of a tedious thing that became muscle memory. Once you nail it down and it's just like on autopilot, it's not a big deal because you kind of get into a rhythm of things, right? With your Photon Arts, it's like da 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 da. Versus if you're not used to it, you feel like you're drowning in water because you're like, oh my God, there's so many things I need to do right now, and it's really really stressful. And so I feel like this might be one of the main causes of why people think that Slayer is very difficult to play or Slayer is very overwhelming, is because they're not used to having the perfect attacks in. They're not used to they haven't found their rhythm to play Slayer. Because something that a lot of people tend to focus on, myself included, is like, I want to pump out as much damage as physically possible in this 10-second window or something, right? And because you're so focused on pumping out damage, you stress yourself out on like getting the execution perfect, but while you're so focused on the execution, like Bujin's there dancing all over your dead body, like screwing you over. And you're like, oh my gosh, I was so focused on the execution, I couldn't dodge all his attacks and block all his combos. And, you know, you just have to take it one step at a time. You know, go maybe to like go to like Ordinal Tower or something first, where things don't hit you as hard. Practice there, get your rotations down, or go to Veterans. Veterans is another very good way to practice. And then once you have it down as muscle memory, then you can challenge yourself and go like Geolabs rank 2 or whatever. Or you can be masochist like the rest of us content creators and just bash our faces against the hardest content. Renova, you a masochist?
I guess I am now, since I always take all the harder challenges now.
Alright, Renova, we are almost running out of time. Is there anything else you'd want to talk about before we start wrapping things up?
Nothing that comes to mind, no.
Alright, perfect. Well, Renova, where can people find you?
You guys can find me on my YouTube channel and my Twitch. Both are the same names as with ZNRenova. And I hope to see you guys there.
Alright, perfect. Again, I will be leaving all of Renova's socials in the description below. Renova is a Slayer main now, right? I'm pretty sure.
Confirmed.
Yep, confirmed. You know, Sega gave him the nod, the whole color scheme, so officially he will be a Slayer main. So you guys can definitely look forward to more in-depth guides on his channel. So definitely subscribe to his channel, check out his Twitch whenever he's live streaming. He's usually testing things and being masochist and like dying to Bujin and stuff. But you know, it's always entertainment. It's always fun to watch.
You guys can watch me suffer. It's okay.
Yeah, that is it for today's episode of Arks Trash Evolution. Thanks again for joining me, Renova.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye. Special thanks to all the members for supporting the channel. It really means a lot to me. Thank you again.